in the end of Parshas V'zos HaBracha, it says, "V'leikam Navi od b'Yisrael k'Moshe." There was no Navi that rose in Yisrael equal to Moshe. The Fri says in that pasuk that b'Yisrael, in Yisrael, there was no equal to Moshe. But but among the nations, there was a Navi equal to Moshe, and that's Bilam. So Chazal seem to say that in some sense, Bilam was the equal of Moshe. There was no equal to Moshe b'Yisrael, but among the nations, there was an equal. And that was Bilam. That seems incredible, that Bilam should have been the equal of Moshe Rabbeinu. But the Fri itself continues and says, but there were differences between Moshe Rabbeinu and Bilam. And the Fri goes on to cite three differences. And our Girsa in the Fri is a bit different, but the Ramban's Girsa in the Fri is that the three differences are this. Number one, that Moshe Rabbeinu did not know what he was going to prophesy. He didn't know what the Nevuah was going to be about. And Bilam knew what the Nevuah would be about. Moshe did not know when he would prophesy. And Bilam knew exactly when he would receive the Nevuah. Thirdly, Moshe was misnabe, he prophesied standing. And Bilam only prophesied nofel, fallen. As the pasuk says, nofel ugluy einayim. That Bilam prophesied fallen with his eyes opened. So there are several things that are perplexing. Number one, the simple meaning of the pasuk is that in Yisrael there was no equal, but Bu'umais there was an equal. So if the point of the pasuk is that Bilam was the equal of Moshe Rabbeinu, how do we understand that there were differences? Secondly, it's hard to understand that it seems two of the differences seem to indicate that Moshe Rabbeinu was not as great as Bilam. Moshe Rabbeinu didn't know what he would prophesy, he didn't know when he would prophesy. Bilam knew what and he knew when. That would seem to imply that Bilam was greater. On the other hand, the third difference, that Moshe Rabbeinu was misnabe standing and Bilam only was misnabe fallen, seems to imply that, at least in that sense, Moshe was greater. So if they are not exactly equal, if one is greater than the other, what does it mean? Is Bilam greater than Moshe? Is Moshe greater than Bilam? Another problem is, why is it that Umas there was a Navi as great as Moshe Rabbeinu? So the Fri doesn't give the reason. But Rashi in our parsha brings the Medrash Tanchuma. The Medrash Tanchuma says that the reason that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave Nevi'im to the Umas Ha'olam is that they should not have a pischein peh. They shouldn't have an excuse. It shouldn't be that they could come and say, had you given us Nevi'im, just like you gave Klal Yisrael, we would have turned out better. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I'll show you. I'll give you Nevi'im, and you'll see how you'll turn out. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave the Umas Ha'olam Bilam, and of course we know what happened. If you want to remove the pischein peh, Bilam would have to be the equal of Moshe Rabbeinu. Because otherwise, if Bilam was a lesser Navi, the Umas Ha'olam would still have an excuse. They would say, okay, you gave us Nevi'im, but you didn't give us a Navi like Moshe Rabbeinu. Had you given us a Navi like Moshe Rabbeinu, then it would have been different. We would have turned out better. Because the only way to remove the pischein peh is that Bilam should be the equal of Moshe Rabbeinu. So if there's differences between Bilam and Moshe Rabbeinu, even small differences, in which Moshe is greater, then l'chara, the whole purpose of sending Bilam to be a Navi for the Umas Ha'olam is defeated. The Umas Ha'olam still have a pischein peh. They have an excuse. They can say, you didn't give us a Navi as great as Moshe Rabbeinu. The Ramban, in our parsha, brings the Fri. He doesn't ask questions on the Fri, but he says an explanation of the Fri, a magnificent explanation, and when we hear the explanation of the Ramban, we'll see all the questions fall aside. But first, to fully appreciate the Ramban, I just want to mention two yesodus, two fundamental principles about Nevuah, which the Rambam mentions in Hilchas Yesodei HaTorah, And against the background of these two ideas, we'll fully understand and appreciate what the Ramban is getting at. The Rambam writes the following: Hanavi efsher shetiyeh nevuaso liatzmo. A Navi can receive nevuah for himself, for his own enlightenment. A Navi isn't necessarily sent on a shlichus, sent on a mission to convey a message. The Navi can receive his nevuah for his own personal enlightenment. Laharchiv libo, to broaden his heart. Ulahaisib dato, to add wisdom. Mashlohai yodea ma'isna dvarim hagdolim. And he would know great things that he didn't know previously. V'yefsher, it's also possible, sheyeshulach la'am me'am ha'aretz, that he may be sent to one of the nations of the world, or la'am she'ir b'amlacha, or to the members, the citizens of a city or a kingdom, in order to direct them, to rebuke them, and so on and so forth. So the Rambam writes there are two types of nevuah. There's nevuah, which is for the enlightenment of the Navi, and there's a shlichus, he's sent on a mission. Furthermore, the Rambam writes that there are different madregas of Nevi'im, different levels of nevuah. Now this the Rambam discusses at great length in the Shmeina Prakim in Perek Zayin, where he speaks about the idea of mechitzos. There are barriers between the divine intelligence and the intelligence of the Navi. And the Rambam surprisingly writes that the mechitzos, the barriers, are character imperfections. Faults in midas are barriers between the divine intelligence and the intelligence of the Navi. So he writes, if a person has many character flaws, probably he won't be able to receive nevuah at all. If he has just one or two, he'll receive nevuah, but it will be through cloudy lenses. Aspaklaria she'ena me'ira. If he has a level of character perfection, then he'll receive nevuah baspaklaria ha'me'ira. There'll be greater clarity. Says Moshe Rabbeinu was the greatest Navi. And the Rambam writes, because in the case of Moshe Rabbeinu, there's only one barrier: the fact that he was a human being. In other words, he achieved a level of absolute character perfection. Chazal say he was the greatest Anav, and Chazal say that Anava is Gedoyla Mikulam, that Anava is the greatest level of character perfection. Therefore, Moshe Rabbeinu was as perfect as a human being can be, but he was still a human being. So that itself is a barrier. But it's an aspaklaria hami'ir, it's a clear lens. The other Nevi'im who had flaws had additional lenses, cloudy lenses, and therefore the Nevuah did not have the same level of clarity. And the Rambam explains that accordingly, there are several differences between the Nevuah of Moshe Rabbeinu and other Nevi'im. He mentions four, but we'll mention three of the four. Number one, that Moshe Rabbeinu was in control of his physical body when he experienced Nevuah. Lesser Nevi'im, they would collapse, they would convulse when they received their Nevuah. Moshe Rabbeinu was able to receive his Nevuah, who omed al omdo shalem, standing firm, standing erect. Number two, he says that all Nevi'im did not receive their Nevuah whenever they wanted. They had to prepare themselves. They had to mechaven their das. They had to direct their minds and prepare for Nevuah. But Moshe Rabbeinu was in a perpetual state of preparation, and therefore he could receive Nevuah whenever he wanted. B'chol eis. And thirdly, he says that all other Nevi'im, they received their Nevuah through an intermediary intelligence, Aidei Malach. In other words, the intelligence of the Navi is not connected directly to the divine intelligence. There's an intermediary intelligence, and therefore the Navi sees the Nevuah b'mashal v'chida, in a allegory and a metaphor. In other words, he doesn't see it explicitly. That's the nature of Nevuah, which is transmitted through a medium. Whereas Moshe Rabbeinu was on the Darga, where he could be directly connected to divine intelligence, and accordingly he saw it b'loi chida, b'loi mashal, with absolute clarity. Shiraya hadavar al burio. So these are the distinctions in the Nevuah of Moshe Rabbeinu and the Nevuah of other Nevi'im. The Ramban says in our parsha that in this pasuk, in the end of V'zayis HaBracha, when it speaks about Moshe Rabbeinu, it is not speaking about Moshe Rabbeinu's knowledge of Hashem. In that, Moshe Rabbeinu was certainly superior to Bilam, for reasons we'll explain in a moment. The Torah is talking about the quality and clarity of the information that was conveyed to Moshe Rabbeinu. And that's the meaning of the pasuk. There was no Navi like Moshe, Asher Yida'o Hashem, Asher Yida'o Hashem, Panim el Panim. So what does that mean, Asher Yida'o Hashem? Says the Ramban, it means there was no Navi like Moshe to whom HaKadosh Baruch Hu conveyed information. That's Yida'o Hashem. Hashem made him know things. Meaning, Moshe Rabbeinu's understanding of the Nevuah was unequaled in its clarity. We're not talking about Moshe's understanding of God. We're talking about Moshe's understanding of his Nevuah, of the message. The message was transmitted to Moshe Rabbeinu with absolute clarity. And the Ramban says a very beautiful pshat. What does it mean, panim el panim, face to face? So he says an amazing pshat. He says like this. He says, when I speak to a person face to face, and I'm trying to explain something to him, I explain it till I see on his face that he understands it. Now, you talk to a person, and the person looks confused, perplexed, and you explain it again, and then, aha! There's a moment you see the clarity on his face. So when Hashem communicated to Moshe Rabbeinu, it was panim el panim, it was face to face, meaning that HaKadosh Baruch Hu made it so clear to Moshe Rabbeinu that he could see in Moshe Rabbeinu's face that Moshe Rabbeinu got it fully. Says other Nevi'im it wasn't that way. It wasn't panim el panim in that same way. Just as an aside, as I always tell Bachrim or Chassanim that they should not speak to their fiancés on the telephone on matters of great importance. So because the telephone is a medium that lends itself to misunderstanding. Because you never know if the other person really understands what you're getting at. You don't see their reaction. But until now, I didn't know that it's a Ramban. Right? The Ramban says that when you want to communicate clearly to a person, you have to speak panim el panim, face to face. Then you can see on the person's face the person understands. But if you can't see the person's face, you don't really know. Does the person understand? Does the person misunderstand? So clear communication has to be panim el panim. But that is the idea that this pasuk is coming to convey. Says the Ramban, in that sense, Bilam was the equal of Moshe Rabbeinu. In the clarity of the message, Bilam was the equal of Moshe Rabbeinu. The Ramban says, why is this? The Ramban says, because since the Nevuahs of Bilam were given l'chvaydam shel Yisrael, it was for the honor of Yisrael, Hashem wanted it to be crystal clear. And therefore he conveyed the message to Bilam with the same level of clarity that the message was communicated to Moshe Rabbeinu. But there's a big difference. Moshe Rabbeinu had that level of clarity because there was a level of character perfection that removed all the barriers. Because Bilam really should not have had that level of clarity because there were too many character imperfections. The Mishnah says that the Talmidim of Bilam were tainted by various character flaws. So if Bilam had that level of clarity, it was a gift. It wasn't something that really he deserved to have. But l'chvaydam shel Yisrael, HaKadosh Baruch Hu conveyed the message to Bilam with a clarity that was the equivalent of the clarity of Moshe Rabbeinu. But that's only in terms of the message. But in terms of Bilam's Yediyah of the Ribono Shel Olam, so then Bilam couldn't have been the equal of Moshe Rabbeinu. Because there were mechitzas, there were barriers. Bilam at most could have been like other Nevi'im. It couldn't have been the equal of Moshe Rabbeinu. And therefore the Ramban says that is the point the Sifri is making. And he says beautifully, he says like this, that all of the Nevi'im, as we said, had to prepare. They had to prepare for their Nevuah. And that's why they knew when it was coming. Because they prepared. So they knew when it would come. If they didn't prepare, they knew it wouldn't come. But Moshe Rabbeinu was in that perpetual state of preparation, so therefore he never knew when it was coming. That's not a deficiency, that's a mila of Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu, because he was in that perpetual state of preparation, he could receive the nevuah anytime. He would never know when it was going to come. That's not a chisaron. It's not Bilam is better because Bilam knew when and Moshe didn't know when. Bilam knew when because it only could come after extensive preparation. Moshe Rabbeinu could get his nevuah without preparation. The Ramban takes it a step further and he says like this. This is a chidush which the Rambam doesn't say. The Ramban adds that since other Nevi'im need preparation, part of the preparation is to prepare for the message you're going to receive. In other words, part of the preparation involves making yourself receptive to a specific type of message. If you prepare for one type of message, you're not going to get a different type of message. And therefore, Bilam, since he needed to prepare for his nevuah, he knew what he would be misnabe. Moshe Rabbeinu, because he was in a constant state of preparation, could be misnabe anything. I'll give you an example. Let's say you have two teachers. And you have one teacher who knows exactly what he's going to say in the class. And you have another teacher who doesn't know what he's going to say in the class. What does that mean? It means the first one is a bigger scholar than the second one? It's the opposite. The first scholar, because all he knows is what he prepared. So what is he going to say in the class? What he prepared. He knows exactly what he'll say. But the other person who's an expert in the field, he doesn't know what he'll say. Why? Because maybe someone will ask a question, and as a consequence of the question, the lecture will take a totally different track, and it may totally depart from the prepared material. The other teacher won't be able to handle that. When he's asked that challenging question, he'll say, oh, that's a good question. Let's think about that. We'll talk about that another day. And he'll go back to his canned lecture. But the other teacher who really knows, if the course takes a detour, he can follow the detour. And then with that thing of Moshe Rabbeinu, Bilam, because he had to prepare for his nevuah, the nevuah, he knew what he'd be misnabe. If it was a subject for which he wasn't prepared, he wouldn't have the nevuah. So Moshe Rabbeinu, because he was prepared for everything, it can be an unexpected topic. So therefore, really, all three differences that Moshe didn't know when and didn't know what, and he was misnabe standing, are all milas of Moshe Rabbeinu as opposed to Bilam. But these milas only relate to the aspect of nevuah, which is the personal enlightenment of the Navi. The aspect of nevuah, which is the communication of a message, in that Bilam was the equal of Moshe Rabbeinu. Not that Bilam deserved it, but in order that the Ummah Ha'olam shouldn't have a Pischain pet. And therefore all the answers fall off. It's 100% correct. Since the Ummah Ha'olam would have a grievance, HaKadosh Baruch Hu had to convey a prophetic message which was equal in clarity to that of Moshe Rabbeinu. The Ummah Ha'olam couldn't say, well, if you would have given us a Moshe Rabbeinu, we would have been better. He says, no. If the purpose of the Navi is to convey a message, Bilam could convey a message as clear as Moshe Rabbeinu. He had the same clarity in the message he was given. The fact that in his personal enlightenment he wasn't even close to Moshe Rabbeinu was irrelevant. That's irrelevant to the grievance of the Ummah Ha'olam. The grievance of the Ummah Ha'olam is that you sent a message to Klal Yisrael through Moshe Rabbeinu, and you sent a message to us through Lesser Nevi'im. That's not a taina. Because in terms of the clarity of the message, Bilam's message was as clear as that of Moshe Rabbeinu. But in terms of the darga of his personal enlightenment, of out of the enlightenment of Moshe Rabbeinu was light years ahead of that of Bilam. So it's a magnificent explanation of the Sifri. It's important to point out one thing, though, and this is an important cloud. When we say, for example, there are chilukim, there are differences in the madregas of the Nevi'im. Moshe Rabbeinu has a greater clarity, and other Nevi'im have lesser clarity. It doesn't mean, Rahman al-Islam, that other Nevi'im can be mistaken as to the meaning of their Nevuah. This is a very, very important yesod. That a Navi Emes cannot be mistaken in the interpretation of his Nevuah. Even though other Nevi'im received the Nevuah, as the Rambam says, a mashal and a chida, but the Rambam writes, Hadvarim shemeidiyim lenavi b'mara hanevuah derech mashal modiyin lo. The things that other Nevi'im are shown derech mashal. Umiyad yechakek belibo pisran hamashal. But immediately in his heart, it is engraved the interpretation of the mashal. In other words, the fact that he sees it in a mashal doesn't mean that he's prone to error. It just means it's a two-step process. First, there's the prophetic experience itself, which is a mashal, and then the pisrain hamashal, the explanation of the mashal, is something which he understands through his intellect. But it is with perfect clarity. Moshe Rabbeinu, it isn't a two-step process. The prophetic experience itself is aspaklaria hamigira. But Avada, the Navi, is not prone to error. If he was prone to error, there couldn't be a mitzvah to listen to a Navi. You know, the Torah says that if a person is mevater al divrei Navi, if a person ignores the nevuah of a Navi, he's chayiv misbedei shamayim. It's a terrible aveira. It can't be. If the accusation of error could be made against the Navi, a person could always say, listen, I should listen to the Navi. Maybe he's making a mistake. Bifrat, if the Navi is coming to tell us to do something which under normal circumstances would be asur. As we know that a Navi, b'hirah shah, can temporarily suspend laws of the Torah, like Eliyahu Navi and Hara Carmel, brought korbanos at a time that bomas were prohibited. So how could such a thing be? If the Navi can make a mistake, how can the Navi himself rely on his nevuah to do an aveir? Maybe he's making a mistake. But this is klar, that it's the repashut that the Navi has perfect clarity. The Ramchal on the Sefer Derech Hashem is nairach on this, and he only adds one possibility. He says it's a possibility that if a nevuah could be understood in many different ways, it's possible that the Navi himself will only understand it one way. He won't understand the double meaning behind the phrase. Now Chazal say, for example, Chazal say that mikra echad yotzeh l'kama tainim, that a pasuk can have more than one meaning. So it's possible that the Navi will receive a message, he will understand one of the meanings, he won't understand the alternate meaning. That is possible. That's not a mistake. Because what he understands is emes, just there's an additional possibility which was not revealed to him, which he doesn't understand. That Ramchal says is possible. And this is how we learn the Gemara in Sanhedrin of Peites. The Gemara says the following. Let's say HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives a nevuah lirah. He gives a nevuah of some calamity, something terrible is going to happen. So the Rambam explains in Hilchos Yesodei Torah, also in the Hakdamah of the Parish Mishnah, that we have a cloud that a nevuah l'taiva, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu promises something for good, it always comes true. HaKadosh Baruch Hu never retracts. But if it's a l'ra, something terrible, punishment, calamity, then HaKadosh Baruch Hu is malei rachamim. He's nicham ala ra. Sometimes the intended victims did tshuva. So it's possible that the gzeira could become bottled, even if it was foretold by another. But the Gemara says in the Peites and Sanhedrin that whenever HaKadosh Baruch Hu does that, he will always inform the Navi of the change. Now, if he told the Navi that this terrible thing will happen, and then the HaKadosh Baruch Hu changes his mind, so to speak, because the people did tshuva, he will always tell the Navi of that fact. So the Gemara asks the question that we find that Yonah doesn't seem to have been told. HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Yonah a prophecy that in 40 days, Ninveh Ne'apechas, Ninveh will be overturned, and the people of Ninveh did tshuva, and Hashem didn't destroy the city, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu never told Yonah that fact. It was only that when Yonah saw that the city wasn't destroyed, he realized that Hashem had changed his mind. So if this is a cloud that HaKadosh Baruch Hu will always tell the Navi, why didn't HaKadosh Baruch Hu tell the Navi? So the Gemara says an amazing thing, that because here the Nevuah had a double meaning. When Hashem said that in 40 days, Ninveh Ne'apechas, Ninveh will be turned over, the Gemara says it can mean in one of two ways. Either it'll be turned over, destroyed like the city of stone, or it'll be turned over because they'll do tshuva. Says Yonah only understood the one meaning. He didn't understand the other meaning. But since the Nevuah had two meanings, it wasn't necessary for HaKadosh Baruch Hu to inform him, because it wasn't a chazara, it wasn't a change, it wasn't a retraction. If there's a retraction, then HaKadosh Baruch Hu changes. Here, it was really implicit in the original Nevuah, just Yonah didn't realize it. That's the Gemara's answer. So the Ramchal writes, in the Derech Hashem, you see from here that a Navi can understand one meaning of his Nevuah, and not the other meaning. But that's not the idea of a mistake. That's not an error. That's not a toes. It's not that he has inaccurate, incorrect information. He may have incomplete information. That's the possibility. And undoubtedly, that will be a chiluk to Moshe Rabbeinu and other Nevi'im. Moshe Rabbeinu, Bas Baklari Amira, his information is complete. The other Navi could have incomplete information, but not incorrect information. L'moshel, there's a mimer from the Maral Diskin, which we'll comment on in a few moments, where he makes a very interesting point. He says, for example, we know that the Torah records nevuas of earlier Nevi'im. The Torah records nevuas that were said to Avraham Avinu, and to Adam Harishon, and to Yaakov Avinu. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu, at Har Sinai and later, when he dictated the Torah to Moshe Rabbeinu, incorporated these nevuas into the Torah. So in the Torah that was given to Moshe Rabbeinu, there was a record of the nevuas that were said to Adam Harishon and to Avraham Avinu and to Yaakov Avinu. So Rav Liskin says it's possible that Moshe Rabbeinu had insights into those words that the original recipients of the nevuah themselves didn't have. Because when Hashem gave this nevuah to Adam Harishon, or to Avraham Avinu, or to Yaakov Avinu, it's possible they had one understanding, but they didn't understand the second understanding, or the third understanding, or maybe the 18th understanding implicit in those psukim. Because since they were Minabe Bas Baklaria Sheinam Ira, so it's possible their knowledge was incomplete. Just as the Ramchal writes. He doesn't quote the Ramchal, but along the same idea, just like Yonah. That he understood one meaning of the Nevuah, he didn't understand the other meaning of the Nevuah. But Moshe Rabbeinu, when that Nevuah was conveyed to Moshe Rabbeinu, when he received the Torah, it was given to Moshe Rabbeinu Bas Baklari HaMeira, so Moshe Rabbeinu would have had an understanding of those Nevuahs that would have been more complete than the original recipient of the Nevuah. Very, very interesting thing. But this is an important yesod to understand. And I think that it touches on one of the Ikrei Hadas. Now, one of the Yud Gimel Ikrim, according to the formulation of the Animam and printed in the Siddur, is Shekal Divrei HaNevi'im Emes. That a Jew is mechuyev to believe that the Nevi'im that were Misnabe, their Nevuah is Emes. It's not conceivable that the Navi misunderstood his Nevuah. If the Navi tells you, this message was conveyed to me by the Ribono Shel Olam, and he's a Navi Emes, he's not a deliberate liar, he's not making a mistake. Shekal Divrei HaNevi'im Emes. So therefore, the chiluk between Aspaklaria HaMeira and Aspaklaria Sheina Meira can only be in, number one, the manner in which it was conveyed. Was it conveyed directly, or was it conveyed through the medium of a mashal? And also only to its completeness. But it can't be that even a nevuah, which is Basvaklaria She'ena Meira, has an element of error. says, Uvechein, just want to point out, there's a mimer, I mentioned it from the Maral Diskin, a very famous mimer. And in many, many Svarim, this mimer is quoted. And Rav Shach and the Sefer Avia Ezri reprinted the entire mimer. He held it was of such value. And I saw that Rav Gedal Yeshua in his Sefer and Parshas Balak repeats the mimer. And Lefiyani Yizdaiti, there are things in that mimer which are not correct. And I'll explain what I mean. And I don't believe that Yisei Tzaddik even wrote the mimer. It's inconceivable that he could have said the things that are written there. The mimer is a lengthy mimer, but Bein HaDvarim, he's discussing a very problematic question in our parsha, which is, what did Bilam think? HaKadosh Baruch Hu warned him again and again and again. Don't go. Whatever I tell you to say, say. And Bilam thinks he's going to curse Klal Yisrael. Like, what did he think? That's a very serious question. And undoubtedly there are many answers to this question. And he gives the following answer. He says the following. He says a Klal, that when the Navi receives his Nevuah, so the Pisrain, the interpretation, is within his own soul, and therefore the quality of the interpretation involves a certain subjectivity. In other words, if a person looks through a red lens, everything looks red. If a person looks through a green lens, everything looks green. So therefore, the Nevuah of the Navi has a certain subjectivity when it comes to the interpretation. Now, this Yesod is a Yesod which is a well-established Yesod. There are Kamarayas to this Yesod, which he doesn't mention, but I'll mention one of them that we've said in the past. The Gemara says in Chagiga that Kol Mashurah Yecheskel Ra Yeshaya, that both the Navi Yeshaya and the Navi Yecheskel had visions of the Merkava, and they really both saw the same thing. And the question is, why is Yeshaya's description so terse and Yecheskel's interpretation so elaborate? So the Gemara says that Yeshaya was daimel ben ir shiras hamelach, like a city boy who sees the king, he's not so impressed. And Yecheskel, since he wasn't raised in Yerushalayim, he was like a ben kfar, like a villager who saw the melech. Therefore he's more impressed, therefore his explanation is more elaborate. Now that doesn't mean that the one explanation is truer than the other. It just means that each one describes it kifi, his own background and experiences, and so on and so forth, which means there's a subjectivity in the way that the Nebuah is expressed. Now, Yecheskel and Yeshaya saw the same thing, but the Yecheskel describes it one way, Yeshaya describes it a different way because of the differences between them. Chazal say that Ein Shnei Nevi'im is Nabim B'Sign Echad, that no two Nevi'im prophesy in the exact same way. And that's for the same reason, because no two people are identical. Kishein she'ein partzufeim shavos, kafein de'eseim shavos. The same way that our faces aren't alike, our ways of thinking aren't alike. And therefore, you can show the same nevuah to two people, each will describe it differently. That doesn't mean, by the way, that one is emes and one isn't emes. It just means that it's different, it's presented differently. But the Maral Diskin goes on in this mimer, and he says a very, very strange thing. He brings a Gemara. It's Gemara in Yuma that Ayin Gimel. The Gemara in Yuma says that Gzeiras Navi Chayzeres, that when a Navi is misnabe l'ro, when a Navi gives a prophecy for calamity, it might not come true. Gzeiras Urim V'Tumim, if the Urim V'Tumim foretells calamity, then it will happen. The Gemara says that the predictions of the Urim V'Tumim are called Mishpat, so Mishpat is never undone. But Gzeres Navi is Chayzeres. A Gzeir L'Ra is Chayzeres. So we always understand, and the Rambam explains this way, that Kadosh Baruch Hu accepts tshuva, there's midas harachamim, and new circumstances could arise. So every Nevuah L'Ra is in a sense on a T'nai. There's an implicit T'nai, and if conditions change, then it might not come true. But he writes that the reason that Gzeres Navi is Chayzeres is because since the interpretation is subjective, it's different. If something comes explicitly from Hashem's mouth, then it's Eino Choser. Rak bin Navi, in the case of a Navi, Tekayach Acher Mu'urav Bai, there's another force here. Pisrain Seichel Hu Enushi. There is the human interpretation. Al Ken Yitachein Lehizbakel. It's possible that the Nevuah won't come true. Which is a repella. It seems to undermine the emuna that Divrei Nevi'im is emes, because what you're telling me is that a Navi can subjectively give an interpretation to his Nevuah, which is not 100% emes, and therefore the Nevuah won't come true. And therefore he writes that this was the kavanah of Bilam. Bilam thought that he would receive Nevuah from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but that Nevuah he could interpret subjectively in a way that the bracha would become a klal, which seems incredible. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives him a Nevuah which would represent the milas, the virtues of Klal Yisrael, and Bilam, through a subjective interpretation, could turn it into a klala. Doesn't sound correct. That's an understatement. It sounds 1,000% incorrect. It's the repella. I don't believe that these words were written by that tzaddik. I think this is a pashut thing that we have to understand, and it does touch on the Ikrei Hadas. That the Chilukei Madregas of the Nevi'im, Moshe Rabbeinu, Spapari, Amira, other Nevi'im, does not mean there is a possibility that the interpretation of the Navi is incorrect. At most, as Ramchal says, it could be incomplete, but not incorrect. And certainly the subjective interpretation could not turn a Nevuah of Bracha into Klal. So I think that this is a something that one should not accept. But Al Kapanim, the Ramban, as we said, is very, very, very beautiful. But since the Maral Diskin did raise this question, that what did Bilam think? Just want to point out that this is a question that many, many Mepharshim discuss. And there's a very, very beautiful explanation from the Arachayim HaKadosh. But again, to appreciate this Arachayim HaKadosh, let me spice it up by mentioning a Gemara, which is a very, very perplexing Gemara. There's a Gemara in Maseches Soita, Maseches Nazir, which says that Bilam brought karbonos. Balak brought karbonos. Bilam told Balak, make 7 altars and offer a par and an ayah on each of the altars, and he did this 3 times. So there were 21 altars, and he brought 2 karbonos on each altar, so there were 42 karbonos that Balak brought. So the Gemara says the following. The Gemara says, La'olam yasok adam b'Torah u'v'mitzvahs afilu shloi l'shmo. A person should learn Torah and do mitzvahs even not for pure motives, even for ulterior motives. Why? Because you see that Bilam brought Balak brought karbonos, and he was rewarded. The Rus HaMoaviyah was a descendant of Balak, because Balak was the king of Moab. His descendant was Egloin, a later king of Moab, whose daughter was Rus. And this was a schus that Balak had because of the karbonos that he brought. Now, first glance, this is a pella. In other words, you do a mitzvah shloi l'shma, okay, it's not the purest of motives, but you bring karbonos for the purpose of cursing Klal Yisrael. So that's called, you did a mitzvah shloi l'shma, and for that you're rewarded? Seems incredible. The pshat could be as follows. What was the purpose of these karbonos? What was the purpose of these karbonos? So the Medrash Rabbah says an amazing thing, that when Bilam brought the karbanos, he said to the Ribono Shel Olam, says Ribono Shel Olam, He says, all the people that brought korbanos until now, the others, says, why did you love them? You loved them because of the korbanos they gave you. He says, what would you prefer? To be worshipped by one nation? Or would you rather be worshipped by the 70 nations? He says, I'll bring you the 70 nations. That was Bilam's kavanah in the korbanos. He says, what's the pshat in the medrash? Let me just say it like this. HaKadosh Baruch Hu told him, don't curse Klal Yisrael. Don't curse Klal Yisrael. Whatever I tell you to say, say. So Bilam understood that he can't go against the Rebbeinu Shlomo. Rebbeinu Shlomo loves Klal Yisrael. Can't go against Rebbeinu Shlomo. There's only one possibility of success, that he can change God's mind. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu should reject Klal Yisrael and accept Bilam as the leader of a new world religion. That's the only answer. Let's understand what this means. Now, the Ramchal writes in the Sefer Das Tvunas that one of the mistakes that the ancient peoples made is that they thought that they could use powers of kishuv, powers of magic, even to go against the Rebbeinu Shlomo. You could use spiritual forces, koiches of tumah, malachim, you could use them against the Rebbeinu Shlomo, contrary to his will. Now, there seems to be a Gemara that says that. The Gemara says that why are kshafim called kshafim? Shemakhishin pamalagish l'mala. That they contradict the heavenly court. That means that kishuv, sorcery, magic, these are spiritual forces that can be used against the Rebbeinu Shlomo. But the Ramchal says it's a mistake, because on the same Omud in Sanhedrin, the Gemara says, the Gemara says, and the pasuk ain't od movado, there's nothing other than the Rebbeinu Shlomo, afilu kshafim. That means there is no force that can be used contrary to the will of the Rebbeinu Shlomo. Sometimes the Rebbeinu Shlomo will choose not to intervene. So it appears that kshafim are getting away with murder. They're doing magic, and they're doing things which seem to be contrary to the Ratzon Hashem. So Hashem sometimes chooses not to intervene. But to think that Hashem can't intervene, that is inconceivable. Einod movado afilu kshafim. Bilam was a sorcerer. So he practiced kishuv. So the sorcerers undoubtedly thought that they were able to use these spiritual forces contrary to the will of the Rebbeinu Shlomo. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu informed Bilam, no, it's not true. Einod movado, there's no force that can be used contrary against my will. So if you're thinking that you're going to do magic and kishuv and nichush against my will, I'm telling you now, don't do it. Don't even dream of doing it. Very good. So Bilam understands that. So Bilam says, okay, I can't use the kayach of kishuv to be makrish pamal yishalmala. So I have to work within the system. I have to change God's mind. I have to get him to see things my way. In other words, to contradict him, that I can't do. Because Baruch gave me enough warnings already. And the story with the donkey certainly proves the point. So to go against his will, that I can't do. But maybe I can change his mind. I can convince him. I'll make him an offer he can't refuse. And Bilam makes a very attractive offer. He says, look, you love Klal Yisrael. Why? Because they brought korbanos. I'll bring more korbanos. He says, they're one nation. I'll bring you the whole world. All you have to do is turn the clock back. Reject Klal Yisrael. Undo the Atav v'chartanu mikalo anim. Undo the selection of Klal Yisrael. And I will bring you the world. I'll bring you the Shiva Munas. Of course, the Baruch Hu said no. And that's what Rashi says. Rashi says that, an amazing thing, Rashi says that why were there 7 altars? There were 42 korbanos, but there were 7 altars. Each time there were 7 altars. Why 7 altars? So it's amazing. Rashi says a pshat which is not in the Medrash that we have, the Medrash is a different pshat. Rashi says, because the Avos made 7 altars. We find that Avraham Avinu made 4 altars, and Yitzchak made 1 altar, and Yaakov made 2 altars. So we have altogether 7 altars. So Bilam is saying it's like this. The Avos of Klal Yisrael made you 7 altars, and that's why you love Klal Yisrael. I'll make you 7 altars. And furthermore, Rashi goes on to say, and what did Avraham Avinu bring on his altar? He brought a single ram. I'll bring a par and an ayil. I'll bring a bull and a ram on each altar. So I will equal the number of altars, and I will outdo them in terms of karbanos. I'll bring you more. But the Medrash says, I'll bring you the Shiva Umas. Of course, HaKadosh Baruch Hu rejected that. Now the Archaim says, that was Bilam's Havamina. He says he thought that when HaKadosh Baruch Hu told him, don't do it, don't curse him, etc., he only meant that don't do it contrary to me. Don't use koichais of tumah, koichais of kishuv to go contrary to my will. But to be mishtadel with the Ribono Shel Olam, that Bilam thought he could do. And that was the Havamina. So if you're asking a question, what was Bilam's Havamina? That was his Havamina. But that l'chara could be the meaning of the Gemara. The Gemara says it was mitzvah shaloi lishma. In other words, Bilam was really offering something to the Ribono Shel Olam. He says, I'm going to bring karbanos, genuine karbanos. And when HaKadosh Baruch Hu appears to him the first time, he says to him, right, I built 7 altars, barachti parvayot mizbech, I brought karbanos on each altar. It was a genuine carbon. Right? He was saying, I will serve you in a superior manner. I will serve you better than Klal Yisrael ever served you. I will bring all 70 nations to you. It'll be a world religion with Bilam at the head. And you can reject Klal Yisrael. It was shloi lishma. Because Bilam really had no interest in starting a world religion. He only wanted to start a world religion so that he could successfully curse Klal Yisrael. So okay, so that's shloi lishma. Right? But it's not that the karbanos were a technique of cursing. The karbanos were genuine karbanos, right? It was necessary for Bilam to convince HaKadosh Baruch Hu to reject Klal Yisrael in order for him to be successful in his curse. He had to get HaKadosh Baruch Hu to agree. But the karbanos were genuine. So the Gemara calls that a mitzvah shaloi lishma. And ultimately, therefore, Balak was rewarded for it. Though, interestingly, you don't find Bilam was rewarded for it. Only Balak was rewarded for it. And that might be something you want to reflect on. The point I want to make is that if you want to wonder what the Havamina of Bilam is, there's no shortage of answers. Undoubtedly, there are many pirushim what the Havamina of Bilam was to be able to successfully curse Klal Yisrael. But to say that Bilam could have received a nevuah of bracha, and somehow his subjective interpretation of klala would have turned a bracha into a klala, that's something which, Lefini is daiti, can't be said. In other words, the idea that a Navi has clarity on the content of his nevuah is, I think, one of the Ikrei Hadats. In other words, again, it can be incomplete. It can be that there are things that the Navi isn't shown because he's on a lower darga than the highest Naviim. But that the Navi could misconceive of his nevuah because of a subjective interpretation that I think is something that's lo nitn layam, or that's something which cannot be said.